Fox News host Trey Gowdy brought on Republican Senator JD Vance to his show and discussed with him the thing that has turned into a massive controversy for JD Vance, which is not just his one childless cat lady remark, but him doubling down on it, and then us finding a bunch of other clips of him espousing ideas that people are essentially less than if they don't have children. That's the common thread throughout these different clips that are now going viral that are resurfaced of JD Vance. And he hasn't handled the fallout of that well, and this is something we talked about already. But what I want to do is two main things. First, it was really interesting to see Trey Gowdy, as I'm going to play for you, do a monologue before bringing on JD Vance that was brutal for Vance, because it's Gowdy essentially through a personal anecdote exploring how absurd the notion is that Vance has been expressing. But first, let me remind you of what's at issue, then we'll do that.
Saying is that we're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made, and so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. And it's just a basic fact. You look at Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children. And how does it make any sense that we've turned our country over to people who don't really have a direct stake in it?
And there are just a bunch of these clips, but the latest one that went viral, as I showed you in a different segment, was this one.
Right, there's just these basic cadences of life that I think are really powerful and really valuable when you have kids in your life. And the fact that so many people, especially in America's leadership class, just don't have that in their lives, you know, I worry that it makes people more sociopathic and ultimately our whole country a little bit less less mentally stable. And of course, you talk about going on Twitter. Final point I'll make is you go on Twitter, and almost always the people who are most deranged and most psychotic are people who don't have kids at home.
It's just wild to assert that not having children makes you more sociopathic. It's just what? Especially given, or not even especially, but we should consider, in addition to the fact that by itself that's crazy, that as a bunch of people have brought up, some people go through these extremely emotionally volatile times when they learn they can't have children, or they want to, and then they learn they can't biologically, then IVF is attacked by Republicans in states like Alabama, and it's even more heartbreaking news. But I'll continue to say this is the embodiment of a MAGA ideology that doesn't understand you can uplift families, promote families if people choose to start them by having children. And we'll talk about how Democratic policies, this is the second big part of the story I want to get into, how Democratic policies actually are the ones trying to help families, while also not having any interest in demonizing, or while also wanting to uplift people who don't have children. It seems like a simple proposition, but they always have to show a stance over here by alienating people over here. That's always how they articulate their views. Quick pause from your viewing of this video to request that if you're not already, you'd click that subscribe button. Easy, free, but it makes a huge difference. Back to the video. So, with that being said, here's Trey Gowdy's monologue. Then I'll show you Vance having to come up after this, which is just, oof.
3 years ago, then Senate candidate JD Vance made a comment about, quote, childless cat ladies who are miserable and want others to be miserable too. It was implied those with children have a more vested interest in the future of the country. We have something called the rule of completeness in the courtroom, which tells us not to accept snippets or out of context quotes, but rather consider everything said or written in full. So I've done that. I've watched that interview many times, and you should too, in full, and draw your own conclusions. When that interview surfaced, two things leapt to my mind. Those of us who talk for a living make mistakes. We say things that in hindsight we might phrase differently or better or not at all. And then I thought about a stormy day at Reagan National Airport where I met two women desperately trying to get home to South America. I was trying to get home to South Carolina. We spent the whole day together, finally making it to Charlotte, and then somehow we got them on a flight to Houston. They were headed to visit family in South America before returning to their new home called America. And when we parted ways, they said they'd like to pray for me as their way of saying thanks for the day spent together. And I assured them it's too late to help me. But I do have a friend who's expecting, and she got some tough news about her unborn child. Would they please pray for her instead? And they did, and they still do to this day. They're Catholic nuns, childless, dedicated to God, love this country, living lives of service to others. And it's not just Catholic nuns. Some of the finest people I know don't have children. Teachers and guidance counselors and lawyers and doctors, and they love other people's children enough to teach and guide and protect and mentor.
Exactly right. Something that every rational person, speaking of sociopaths, JD, every rational person can easily conceptualize, that for whatever reason, you can choose not to or end up not having children and be the most dedicated person to the future of our country. Pete Buttigieg mentioned before he had kids, while JD Vance was saying you don't have a physical stake in the future of our country, Buttigieg was serving the country, risking his life in the military, and he was describing that act of risking his life was in the interest of the future of the country, even before he had children that would live into that future. So, of course, it seems so easy to come to the proper conclusion about this, but JD Vance is struggling. Trump struggled to answer that. And even just quickly, the Daily Beast reported on Brian Kilmeade saying that when you're explaining, you're probably losing. So even he doesn't think Vance is handling this very well. And then after having to have his narrative crushed, as he's probably sitting, I've done these interviews where you're waiting and you have to sort of watch before they bring you in what's happening before you. So he probably hears in his earpiece Trey Gowdy telling this story and his stomach just drops, and then he's brought on.
People are calling me who very much would like to support you and President Trump. Dr. Connie Rice does not have children. Neither does my friend, your colleague, Tim Scott. George Washington did not have biological children, and neither did James Madison. So I think you will agree with me that direct offspring are not necessary to be fully invested in the future of this country.
Of course not, Trey. I do think that being a parent actually has a profound effect on somebody's perspective, and we should honor and respect that. But there are a whole host of people who don't have children for a whole host of reasons, and they certainly are great people who can participate fully in the life of this country. And that's not what I said, Trey. If you look at what the left has done, they have radically taken this out of context and, in fact, aggressively lied about what I've said. What I do think is true, Trey, and this goes to the heart of what I was talking about 3 years.
I love how he always does this in every interview. Oh my gosh. The left, they just twist my words. And next point, without explaining how we're twisting your words, what it was that you were saying in those clips, and instead just says, what I am saying is that we like families. Great, us too, you weirdo. How is that answering for why people are upset with you?
Part of what I was talking about 3 years ago in those comments, but it's going to be something I continue to talk about, is that the left has increasingly become explicitly anti-child and anti-family. They've encouraged young families not to have children at all because of concerns over climate change. They've suggested that people who do have children are somehow being selfish, when I think being a parent is actually the most selfless thing that you can do, and again, really does transform your perspective.
Okay, so that's the part I really do want to address. It's so dishonest what he just asserted there, because if any party, and I don't even want to do that broad strokes, I know different people think helping families means different things, or I should say, because of that, I'm not going to say the Republican Party is the anti-family party. Maybe I've said that before, but if we're going to make an argument that one party is, it would be the Republican Party. JD, it's not just about rhetoric, and the rhetoric he cited, who is that coming from? Show me a Democrat who said it's selfish to have children who's any Democrat of note. Because yes, just like how we can find a gazillion online Nazis, but I'm not going to say that means all of the right is Nazis. You can find people who are extreme on the left who say all sorts of wild things like no one should have children because of climate change. That's just an absurd notion, but it's also irrelevant to our political conversation because people in a country, in a world this size, are saying all sorts of crazy things all the time online. But if you look at people in positions of power, there's a very different story where elected Democrats are actually the ones advocating, while not perfect, on behalf of pro-family policies. As an example, the enhanced child tax credit was something that would have been continued if Biden got his way, and he implemented it in the American Rescue Plan. But Republicans wouldn't allow for that, and two conservative Democrats to be continued, which is horrible, and it cut child poverty in half. So we could continue doing that with things like the child tax credit, and because it's a child tax credit, presumably it incentivizes or at least makes it easier for people who do have children. In the infrastructure bill, you had child care investments and paid family leave enhancements, the Affordable Care Act enhancements that Biden oversaw, the Biden-Harris administration and Democrats were directed towards supporting families, trying to get them more affordable health care. If Republicans didn't obstruct, and all of this, by the way, except for the infrastructure bill with some Republicans, but all of this is stuff that Republicans time and time again have actively obstructed, as shown by what Biden proposed but couldn't get through because of all the Republicans and a couple conservative Democrats who are just so close to being Republicans. Build Back Better, for example, you had universal pre-K proposed, which study after study has shown would dramatically increase the likelihood of a really great outcome for children. It improves people's learning for the rest of their life if they get that pre-K, so making that universal. Affordable housing investments that have been made and were proposed in Build Back Better, obviously benefiting families. Universal paid family and medical leave proposed in Build Back Better. We didn't get because of mainly Republicans. I would say those are pro-family policies. Even the investments in small businesses that have been proposed and some that have been implemented by the Biden administration, I should keep saying Biden-Harris administration, now she's the candidate, have been a part of what is attempting to invest in communities. People can start a small business. That's obviously something that can support their family, not to mention the largest investment in renewable energy in the history of this planet we call Earth and humanity. Largest investment ever in that. That is energy that's cheaper for consumers and better for the planet. And that planet, we want to be in a better place. For who? Our children. And we can go on and on and on. At every step, you have Democrats proposing, and then if they can get past Republican obstruction, implementing pro-family policies, and Republicans blocking and opposing those sorts of policies. So I don't want to hear this, the left has become anti-family. What are you talking about? And again, that's just scratching the surface. It even brings into my mind when they'll say, we need to invest in childhood mental health, and that's what we should be doing instead of gun regulations. The point we make is, how about both after school shootings? And then you look into the record of mental health investments and who supports those, and it's Democrats and Republicans obstructing. You go down the list, and the policy, that's why I always encourage people, look at the on-paper policy, because the rhetoric gets really confusing. The online debates get really confusing. But you look at those records of either party, and both are far from perfect. But one is obviously the one you should operate within and try to get progress through because of its record being far, far superior. Let me know what you thought of that in the comments. If you want to get extra content daily, you can do so by clicking that join button below.